This is 16.2 Techniques of a Coach. Within sport, there are multiple techniques that coaches use to improve the performance of an individual or a team. Some of these techniques include goal setting, demonstrations, and instruction. Goal setting is one of the techniques adopted by some coaches to improve the performance of an individual or a team. This technique is used to increase an individual's or team's commitment level in relation to achieving particular goals. This technique involves setting different goals regarding their timescale, for example short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. It is always good to have a range of goals in order to maintain motivation levels, because if only long-term goals were set, for example, the individual or team may become demotivated to achieve the goal if they are not seeing any progress or achieving anything for quite some time. Therefore, combining long-term goals with both medium and short-term goals can keep the individual or team motivated at all times, if they're constantly working towards a goal, even if it is a short-term goal within a session, they're still working towards something. In relation to football, for example, a short-term goal could simply be to achieve 20 successful passes within one game. A medium-term goal could be to be top 2 within the table by Christmas, and lastly, a long-term goal could be to win the cup. Goals must be made smarter, and by this I mean specific to the performer and the sport or activity that they're doing. There needs to be a method in which progress can be tracked, so through quantitative data, for example. For example, tallying down the amount of passes they complete. And this also needs to be accepted, meaning that all others involved are shared with the goal and a goal is negotiated by a coach, for example. The goals also need to be realistic, so they're challenging but they are reachable. Just so that motivation levels will dramatically drop if the goal is not reachable. Also, a time frame is needed for when the goal should be achieved, so the performer has an idea of how long they have before the goal should be met, and this can maintain good work ethic. If there's no time frame, the performer might take a back seat and not try as hard if they think they have lots of time, so progression will take a lot longer. And the goals also need to have an element of excitement in them, otherwise the performer won't be motivated to achieve the goal if it's boring. And lastly, the goals and progress toward it need to be able to be recorded to track the progress and see whether the individual is on target or not. When establishing goals, it is vital to consider factors such as the performer's ability level, whether they're setting a team or an individual goal, and the environment that the performer is in, whether it be a match or just training, for example. All these factors need to be considered before the goal can be established so that suitable and effective goals can be made. For example, setting a novice performer the goal of being able to carry out 30 keepy-uppies by the end of a football training session is very unrealistic and not suitable at all to that performer. On the other hand, this goal will be much more suitable to an elite performer who already has a good skill set in that sport and more specifically to the skill itself. Therefore, considering factors like this before the goal is set is needed to make sure that the goals are best suited to that performer and the task at hand. And there are both good and bad points to be made about the technique of goal setting. One advantage of it is that it aids in maintaining motivation levels. If an individual has something to work towards, then it will boost their effort levels as they will want to achieve the goal. Therefore, a constant supply of goals will ensure motivation levels are increased. However, this technique could be demotivating in that if the goals are unachievable, then the performer will put no effort in to even try and achieve the goal if they know there's no way of achieving them, no matter how much effort is put in. That is the reason why goals need to be made realistic, otherwise problems like this will occur and performance improvements won't be made. On the other hand, goal setting can boost an individual or a team's confidence levels if they can physically see, through looking at their progress on paper, that improvements are being made and that they're on target to achieving their goals. This can then give them the confidence to continue to work in order to achieve the goal, and good work ethic will be maintained throughout. Consequently, if the performer or team can see that little or no progress is being made, then confidence levels can dramatically drop, and it may lead to the performer or the team giving up and not continuing to work towards the goal, even if it's still achievable. Furthermore, this technique can be ineffective if there are too many goals put in place to the individual or the team to work towards. Some people might find it too difficult to focus on more than one goal, again needing to take into consideration that the type of people you're working with so that the right amount of goals can be set. Moving on then to demonstration. So demonstration is another technique used by coaches which involves a coach giving a visual action of performance in order to aid in the learning process of a new skill or technique. This provides the learner with a mental picture in their head which they can then take away with them and put into practice. This can then be used on its own, but in most cases it's used in conjunction with verbal instructions to aid in further learning by the individual or team. When referring to a sporting example, a demonstration could be a coach physically going through the technique of a badminton shot, smash shot for example, and this means just actually performing the shot themselves to the individual as opposed to telling them the technique through verbal communication. Again, this technique needs to take into account some considerations such as the type of learner at hand. For example, if you're teaching someone who learns best through verbal instruction, so for example an autonomous learner, then giving them a demonstration of a skill won't be very effective as they might not learn the skill as well compared to being taught through verbal instruction. On the other hand, if you gave a demonstration to someone who learns best through visual cues, so a cognitive learner for example, then this technique would be very effective and the performer would learn the skill well. This technique can be effective in that if the skill needs to be repeated by the coach, then it can be carried out very quickly and very easily. However, if the skill is carried out with poor quality and the coach uses the wrong technique themselves, then everyone else will learn the wrong technique of the skill and no actual skill would have been learned, meaning that the demonstration is very ineffective. In addition to this, if you're working with a large group of people and some people can't see the demonstration being performed, when it comes to performing the skill, they won't be able to perform it as well as they weren't able to see the correct technique being performed in the first place, therefore being ineffective. However, if small groups of people are used, then this technique will be more effective as there is an increased chance of everyone being able to see the skill performed, therefore more chance of everyone else displaying the correct technique. If some individuals, such as cognitive learners, struggle with technical language, then this form of learning is most effective for them to learn a new skill, so that language barriers can be overcome and they can still learn the correct technique without being verbally taught it. In contrast, this technique isn't the most effective on its own. It requires an element of verbal communication as well. In order to be most effective, it is quite difficult to learn a new skill solely through a demo, therefore not being very effective when used on its own. And lastly, we've got technical instruction. So technical instruction is a technique used by coaches which involves verbal communication to convey a technique or skill. The coach should have the background knowledge to give the coaching points to go with the technique or skill, and if they don't have the technical vocab, then the technique will not be very effective at all. So with reference to the badminton smash shot again, using this technique will involve the coach having no physical input to the skill whatsoever and instead will only use verbal communication to explain the technique for the smash shot. For example, stating that you turn your body and stand sideways to the net with your non-racket shoulder facing the net. You then shift your weight on your rear foot and bend your elbow and lock your wrist, preparing to swing forward, etc. Only verbal communication is used and there's no element of demonstration in this technique. This technique is very effective if the instructions given are clear and concise. If they are clear and concise, then everyone will understand what is being said and they can perform the new skill or technique correctly. Whereas if the instructions given are too complicated, then the learners will not understand what they're supposed to be doing, meaning that when they go away to practice a technique or skill themselves, they won't actually have a clue what they're supposed to be doing, therefore the incorrect technique being carried out, leading to a reduction in performance levels. Like the other techniques, this technique also involves taking into consideration the types of learners the coach has. Elite performers will suit best to technical instruction as they already have a good mental picture of what the skill is like, therefore not actually needing to be visually shown how to do it, and they will have a good knowledge of the technical vocabulary regarding skill, therefore understanding what is being required and therefore being able to go away and do the skill themselves. However, this technique will be ineffective for novice performers as they won't have a good foundation of technical vocab, therefore not understanding what they're being told and therefore learning best through demonstration as opposed to verbal instructions. This technique can be effective if only a few coaching points are used, as the learner is more likely to still be engaged in the learning process. In comparison to this, if too many coaching points were made, it would result in a loss of focus from the learner and then finding it too difficult to take in an overload of information, which could therefore lead to a reduction in performance levels as they won't know how to perform the correct skill. So to conclude then, it is made aware that all techniques mentioned above have both times where they're more effective and times where they're less effective. But this is all dependent upon the type of learners you have and the task at hand. Factors regarding to the learners you have and the situation you're in will all need to be taken into consideration to decide which technique is best suited at that time. If the right decision is chosen, then performance levels can be enhanced. However, if the wrong one is chosen, then performance levels can dramatically decline as the learner will be unaware of what they're having to do. It is vital that the right technique is chosen to ensure the most effective way of learning for the performer you have at hand. There are many more techniques beyond the ones I've discussed previously, which coaches also use to improve performance levels, for both an individual and a team. But it is the 3 techniques that I've mentioned just above that I've chosen to discuss in more detail and make comparisons between. Thank you.